All right, Drew and Jay, take it away. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Katrina. As Katrina said, we're going to talk through interior page layout now. And we're going to show an example of bluecompass.com kind of as we go through this. But interior pages are slightly different than the home page. To Drew's point, much more important when it comes to content, but still needing to reinforce the brand. The first thing with interior pages is focus on the content. We're talking about content-driven design. So making sure that everything that needs to be said about your product, service, whatever the topic you're covering, it's got to be there. Without good content, your design will never be seen. You can spend all the time in the world putting little subtle animations together or having a world-class video, but if the content isn't there, nobody will ever see it, and that's the worst thing that can happen to a page. And then design is at its best in service of good content. That may not be a popular opinion when you're looking at like that 25 residents website where that probably wins awards. That is probably out there for multiple design awards, but it is all style, less substance in that situation. So how much organic search value you're going to get there. And we really focus on how do you drive that content or drive that value via content. One question to ask yourself when it comes to content on a site, and this is one of the surprises you find when you do a content audit, is how many different types of content do you have? Do you have FAQ pages? Do you have blogs? Do you have service pages? Do you have product pages? Do you have call to action pages? Do you have case studies, white papers? The list goes on and on and on, and you start to forget about that a little bit, and understanding that with all of those different content types, you need to have a template, is what we would call it, for an interior page. So really being intentional, again, getting back to being intentional about how many different types do we have, how many different types do we need, and how do we build a design around what that content is best used for. And then what is the best way to display that content? We go back and forth on this for a lot of different things. FAQs, we're normally using accordions on pages. Blog content tends to be more text-based with visual aids. Service pages, a little bit of a blend of a lot of different things. But what is the best idea there? And to not be too beholden to what already exists or what your preference is. It's a good place to get a designer in and get a developer in. We have the advantage of having everybody in the same room, and best idea wins. That's really the best way to approach some of this, some of these concepts. I'm going to jump onto our bluecompass.com and kind of give an example of this through there. So I'm going to be self-serving and show you our SEO page. Also, look at that guy in the background there. I didn't pay them to choose these pictures, but
it's interesting how you chose the page with yourself on it.
I didn't choose it. It chose us. That's how this works.
Are you wearing
It's like the worst
shirt
excuse
today?
ever. Yeah.
You know this is the only uniform I have, Katrina. This is my go-to.
And next, are we going to look at your employee profile page?
Yeah, that's at the end. Yeah. No. So again, we mapped all of these pages out ahead of time. For our service pages, we're going to have a very specific structure. We're going to have these heading sections. We're going to have an opening paragraph, and then we're going to have these anchor links that take you to the most important pieces of content on the page. That was something we were really intentional about on the front end, and every single one of our service pages needed to follow that template. And then that made it much easier for our designer to build a design around that concept. If you do it in reverse and you're trying to make your text fit a design that was already done, you're going to end up with things that just don't fit together or look really out of place or disjointed. So focusing on the content on the front end is really useful in this way, because this page starts to feel much more cohesive. It feels like it was planned out. It doesn't feel like we're jumping around. And we still have a lot of content on this page.
Is your photo good for SEO?
It is in fact. I may or may not look up Jay Snyder every day, and that's I think that's driving the value. But
I guess so.
All right, jump
Questions?
Yes.
Are you recommending different templates then for, obviously We had a question from the crowd, just for those that are virtual, and she asked if you would recommend different templates for blogs, white pages. I did a really bad job summarizing that, but that's what Jay's going to answer.
Yeah, so I always hesitate to say anything specific in those situations because it depends is the worst answer, but it's usually the right answer. But in this situation, I think because of the specific use case of white papers and case studies, it usually makes sense to have a different template for that because you want to give some type of summary or synopsis high up on the page, some visual aid of what they can expect to be downloading or potentially, and then a way to take action, whether that's add in your email and then get emailed whatever the document is. And then the rest of the page after that is meant to be more supportive and actually really more for SEO value from that point. But yes, I'm sure there are edge cases I'm not thinking of where a white paper could fit within a regular service page, but that would be my recommendation. Drew, do you have anything to add there?
No, I think that's a good answer. I mean, like you said, I guess it depends. Like my personal website is pretty simple. Like, I mean, I'm not Blue Compass. I am not a big organization or anything like that. Obviously, it's just me. And so my blog page is pretty much the same as my About Us page. It's very standard. It's very simple, and that works just fine for me. So, I mean, some smaller websites and smaller organizations, I think you could probably have the same template for a lot of different pages. But when you get into a place where you're trying to evoke different feelings and different reactions and speak to different groups, then the complexity of the templates can be really beneficial.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that the hamburger menu thing is kind of archaic now. And so what I saw up there were the different colors. Is that your answer to that? Because it was different categories.
The Mega Nav.
Yes. So we have on that page, and we'll jump back over to it here in a second, we have accordions. And so that was a way to show a lot more content without taking up a bunch more of the page. But as far as navigation goes, we pretty much only use the hamburger menu on the smallest devices, mobile specifically, just because this layout doesn't necessarily play well with a mobile device.
The things I saw on the color bars were things that I would see in a hamburger menu when you click.
The question was,
yeah.
the things we're seeing in the color bar are oftentimes things we would see in a hamburger menu.
True, yes. And so these are all, you're right, there are elements of this that are things that you might expect to see in a navigation. I'm assuming this is the section you were talking about. The way we approach this section is it's highlighting sub-services. So what are some things that somebody might be interested in if they're going to the SEO page of our site? They likely need an SEO audit. If you need an SEO audit, you likely need technical SEO help. And so we've provided all of that content here in a really accessible way, similar to how you would provide via navigation. Yes.
This was also a cheat code for us to have a page that wasn't 1,500 scrolls long, but we still got all that quality content from an SEO purpose, so great dual use.
Yeah, we're not above cheating to get more content into a page. That's 100%. All right. The second point here is clear call to action. It should be very apparent, and your CTA should be very apparent, and it should be relevant. Whatever you want them to do next on that page needs to be available very high up on the page. If that's get a quote, or that's submit for a form, or we're talking about white papers, is that submitting your email address to get a document back, that needs to be up front on the page in that what we would call the hero section. The other thing with CTAs to consider is, what does your user expect to do next? What do they want to do next? If you are making them wait to get to all the way to the bottom of the page to actually understand what your service is, that you could see some logic as to, oh, well, then they have to get all the way through the page and they've read all my content, so now I'm going to give them what they want. In the end, that doesn't end up serving you, because they're going to read the first two sentences of that page and they're going to say, this isn't what I was expecting, so I'm going to leave now, because they have that option. You don't have a captive audience when it comes to your website. They have infinite number of options of other places to go. So really keep that in mind when it comes to whatever your call to action is.
Do you have to have a call to action on every page?
The question,
I'm sorry, go ahead. Or should you have a call to action on every page?
The question was, do you have to have a call to action on every page, or should you have a call to action on every page?
This is a great question, and I'm going to have a controversial answer here, which is my favorite. Katrina's sweating. She doesn't
Watch
like
it, Jay.
this. You should have a point to every page, and that point is usually reflected in some type of call to action. Now, does that mean you should have a form on every page of the site, or somebody should be able to call from every page on the site? Not necessarily, but there should be something that you're driving them to do, or else you're just telling them, go to this page and then you're welcome to jump off the site, because you're not giving them that next step or next action that needs to be taken. So I think in a roundabout way, I'm saying yes, but no.
I would think that most everyone here in this room, including us, would have a call to action we'd like someone to do on every page on our website. And, you know, maybe some like blog websites, the point is just to get a lot of views and keep people on the page, you know, to sell advertising, or maybe someone's just blogging for fun or something like that. And so, I mean, I suppose it depends on the website and the industry and things like that, but yeah, most of the time I would think so.
I think a good example of that is like on our blogs, if you go to the very bottom, there's always a CTA at the top in the navigation that you can get to, but if you go to the bottom of our blogs, it is a carousel of other featured blogs you should look at. So we're driving you to continue to engage and consume more information that we provided out there, because the point of those blogs is to position us as experts in the space. So we want you to continue to understand what it is that we have to say on the subject.
There's never a button that says leave website. Like that, technically none of us ever want anyone to ever leave our websites. The more time people spend on your website, the more they can absorb your story, the more they can figure out what you're all about, the more they can be impressed with your services, your products, or whatever that might be, the more they can take in your expertise and see you as thought leaders. So you just never want anyone to leave your website. I think like ultimately that's some sort of goal.
Even on a page like your culture page or your About Us page, a call to action like come work with us or see our open positions, there's usually something you can tie into, even when it's less salesy or not related to a product or service that you offer.
Yeah, a call to action doesn't have to be buy this right now. Like Jay said, it could just be now read this blog article or something like that.
Awesome. What do you need to know to help? So with whatever call to action you have, I'm more specifically thinking about forms here. There are two ways that people often go with forms. You ask for everything, including the first name of your second child, to just getting an email address and calling it good. Neither of those are necessarily the right answer. What do you need to know with that call to action to be helpful to them? When you overstuff a form, you drop your conversion rate for that form drastically. When you don't have enough information to actually take action, or your business development team to do anything about it, that's going to be really hard. It's going to make your sales process more difficult. So know what you need to know to be helpful to that user.
It's like every field you add to a form means a smaller percentage of people will fill it out. So you got to be really careful about it. But like, yeah, at the same time, you probably just don't want their first name. That's not enough information to be really valuable for you.
And then the fourth bullet here, just are you giving more than you're getting back? Your content is freely accessible on the internet, so you're already giving something, but make sure you're giving them enough that it feels worth them filling out the form to get more information in the long run. A good example of this would be like a white paper. You're giving up your email address, meaning you're expecting somebody to email you back, and that can be a heavy lift for somebody. So by making sure that white paper is really valuable, that's where you're going to get the most return on that it's something really important to that end user.
Like on this page, we gave people your photo. I feel like that's enough.
Absolutely, yeah.
We gave them a lot.
I tried to advocate for only having a form after that hero section, and nobody liked it. But that was
No content, just your photo and a
that's
form.
right. That's right.
Conversion rate off the charts.
Didn't make it through. That was an example where best idea wins didn't make it through, but that's okay. Another key thing to think about is scannability, readability, and accessibility. Make your site content approachable. We all have PhDs in whatever subject it is that we do. We think that we know all of this information and that everybody cares about all the jargon that we have. Make your content approachable. Your user, anything that your user would expect to see there, yes, you should have those words there. Talk the way your audience talks. But all of the jargon or internal ways that you talk about things, it's going to be a stumbling block for your user that then makes them think, am I in the right place? Am I talking about the right thing? Do I know what I'm talking about? And those are questions you don't want the user to ask themselves.
This is an example. If you've heard me speak before about this topic, I've probably given this example before, but it's a really good one. And we worked with a client that did bariatric surgery, and that term was all over the page and all over the website. But the problem is here in Iowa, the search volume for bariatric surgery is extremely low, but the search volume for weight loss surgery is extremely high. And so it was an example of using the right term, but not the right term for the audience. And so all of us are guilty of that sometimes. We use the right terms for our industry, but maybe we don't use the term that our audience is searching for.
And then we talked about this a little bit already, but right for your customer, not for you. Again, use their terminology. What are they searching for? Especially when you're talking about in the world of SEO, it doesn't necessarily matter how you say something. It matters what they're looking for and how they're going to find it in search. No jargon, no internal terms, no, this is how we say it. And that's hard sometimes to get across to an internal team, is that I understand this is how we say it. I understand this is our process, but nobody cares about that when they're searching. They may care about it when you're actually in the sales process. Let your business development team handle that correction of, well, this is how in general people talk about it, but we actually think about it this way. Much more relevant to a face-to-face conversation rather than trying to optimize for how somebody will search for something.
We have a question from one of our virtual listeners, and they're asking, how do you know how the customer says it?
That is a great question. So primarily the way we do this is via keyword research. So we have a number of tools that we leverage, one of them being Search Console, where we take a look at your website, actual queries of people that have gotten to your site from Google search. That's one place to look, because that's how people are finding you already. And then there are tools we leverage, SE Ranking, but there's also SEMrush and Ahrefs and all of these other tools that you can use to see what are the search volume for these terms of sites like yours. How are people getting there? What terms are they using to get there? So we would recommend leveraging some of those tools if that's something you're curious about. But yes, this is a part of our process, is leveraging keyword research.
I would say, like for me, when I do keyword research personally, I use even simpler tools. So I will use, the term that you're interested in, and I'll go to Google and I'll search. And then there's a section called People Also Ask. And those are searches that the same people who search for that term are also doing. And sometimes that gives you a little insight into how your target audience is searching. You can also scroll down to the very bottom, where it has the G and the O, all the O's. And you'll see related searches down there. Same deal. So that's just kind of an easy way to figure out other type of searches. And so maybe you'll say, ooh, yeah, that is a way that to refer to the same thing. Maybe I should throw that copy in there a little bit. Another tool that's really fantastic, it's free, it's very easy to use, is Google Trends. Jump on Google Trends, type in, 3 variations of a service line or a phrase or whatever that might be. And then you can see in your geographic area or in the whole world, 24 hours ago or decades ago, what the search volume is and which one's most important. So like for an example, if you have a dog grooming business, you could do dog grooming, dog care, dog shampooing. And which one of those has the highest search volume in the Des Moines area? Because my dog grooming business is just here in Des Moines. Okay, dog grooming is actually quite a bit higher than the other two. Therefore, it would make the most sense for me to use that phrase the most. That doesn't mean I need to stay away from the other two. Google is smart enough to know those are related, but I should probably use that type of vernacular a little bit more because that's how my audience is talking here.
Absolutely. And then one thing we kind of noted this with the 25 website is keep an eye on text contrast. If you have white text on a yellow block, it is going to be unreadable. And not only is that a bad user experience for the vast majority of users, but if you have any users with visual disabilities of some kind, or they are colorblind, they're not going to be able to read that text at all. You're also going to get dinged on this from an accessibility audit standpoint, which Google has said that they're considering more and more when it comes to websites.
And that's especially important for us who are in like healthcare industries, financial industries, and things like that. ADA compliance. Like a few years ago, a lot of organizations got really scared because there's some lawsuits because websites weren't ADA compliant. And I think that's a bit of a scare tactic that does not happen very often, but it's still smart to make sure that all of our websites are ADA compliant. And like when we design a website, it is ADA compliant, but it's also a very complex thing. And there's different levels of ADA compliance. There's like level A, level AA, level AAA. And it's not just the design of the website, it's the content of the website, and it's like text and is text supporting a video in the right way. There's a lot of things. So you can have your website launched as ADA compliant, and then as time goes on, it can fall out of compliance, and usually does. I mean, it's not just you. Most websites out there are not as compliant as they should be. So, you know, don't feel scared about it, but it is a good idea, especially for those industries that I mentioned, every now and again to get an ADA audit. And that's basically where, you know, a tool, I think there's tools out there that do it. We do it if you ever want us to. Runs through your sites, you get a list of every single page that's not compliant, and okay, here's what needs to be fixed. And so that might be useful for you.
Absolutely. All right, and then is your content accessible to screen readers? This is, again, one of those technical details that probably only I care about, but I want to include it anyway. Having your content accessible to screen readers is important, again, for anybody that has visual disabilities to be able to scan through that content and have it read back aloud to them. It also ensures that it is accessible via Google, because if it's not accessible, if it is accessible to a screen reader, it is going to be accessible to Google. All right, and then another main thing here is break up your content. Too much text is overwhelming. You have a sea of text, you are going to look at that and think, I did not sign up for a course today. Maybe you did. But for this page, I don't want to read 25 paragraphs on the subject. I need to see that broken up so it doesn't feel so overwhelming. So what sections can you utilize? Where does it make sense to break that content up? We usually think of this in terms of headings. Headings are a really important way to break up your site and your pages. So what sections does it make sense to have on this page? And then what are common page sections that I'm going to need? So going to being intentional about design and making sure you have a content-driven design, are there any main components that need to exist on this page? In the Slate CMS, we call these stacks, which are little blocks of, like, style blocks, basically. And I will show you an example, again, going back to this beautiful page on the site of all of these modules we have. So this top section is a module. Kaylee really liked that. She's enjoying this. This is a module here, just a header section module, and then it moves into a text block and then kind of a center card, the accordion we talked about earlier. These are all styled blocks that we were really intentional about when we designed our service pages. So we would write a bit of content and then say, this section would make the most sense as an accordion. Here's what would need to be included in as each component of that accordion. This section is going to be a logo carousel. This is going to be a testimonial. And we started to write out what are all of those stacks that we're going to need, and how do we then take that to our designer and the front end team to get that built out. So another way that you can be really intentional on the front end about what are we going to need from a content standpoint. All right, and then the last section for interior pages is effective imagery. So what do you want your images to say about your site? When you go to bluecompass.com, you see us. You see us having fun. You see us spending time with each other. You see us doing excellent work for our clients. That's us. That's what we want our imagery to evoke. We have a lot of clients come to us and say, should we be using illustration? Should we be using stock photography? Should we be using custom photography? It could be any of those answers. It really depends on what does your site need to say about you as a business. So here's those examples again. We have illustration, stock photography, custom photography. Again, there's use cases for all of these, but it's about what do you have budget for, what do you have time for, and what makes the most sense for what you're trying to get across to your customers. And then making sure you optimize your images for the web. One of the most damaging things from an SEO standpoint today is having images that are too large on your site, because you often have multiple images. You have 3 or 4 images.
File size wise.
File size wise, yes. Yeah, not actual size on the page. Good. It's a good correction.
If so, we'd get docked for your huge photo.
That's right. That's right. But we've optimized it so that it's a little grainier, so you can't quite see how. I'm going to leave that alone. But compressing those images so that they are not bearing so much weight to the page load. That's really important, especially with the advent of Core Web Vitals. It's one of Google's key ranking factors in page load, especially largest contentful paint is what they call it. What is the largest file on your page? 99% of the time it's an image that you haven't compressed.
Yep. We generally say, like, for the web images on your website, try to keep them at 100 kilobytes or less. Sometimes they have to be bigger than that. We do have some images on our website that are bigger than that. You just need a full size, like a really, really cool photo. But usually that's what we shoot for. And so, you can use Photoshop or other tools to compress those down. Try to get them below 100 if you can.
All right, then we're moving into Content Arc and Nav.
So, when Blue Compass started, it was just 2 of us. And then, thankfully, over the years, we've grown and added more team members. And now we have dozens of team members, which is really fantastic. So as Blue Compass has grown over the years, our structure has had to change, which is good, because if our structure doesn't change, then we're in trouble. Things aren't going to run as well as they should. I used to do project management and design and sales and video and copywriting and legal stuff. And thankfully, over the years, I was able to hand those over to people who are better than I am at all of those things, it wasn't particularly hard to find people who were better than I was at all of those things, but I'm thankful for that. So it's kind of the same thing with your website when it comes to your content architecture and your navigation. Like, ideally, your website should grow, it should evolve, it should get bigger and more effective. We're talking a lot about redesign, but in a perfect world, you don't redesign your website and then let it sit for 3 years and then redesign again. Ideally, all of our websites continue to get valuable content. Maybe it gets improved here or there. Maybe you do a UX test to see if this page is working or not, and you improve it a little bit so you get more conversions on that page. So hopefully all of our websites evolve and get better as time goes on. But the navigation, the content architecture is really important. So when I say content architecture, I mean just the strategic organization of website information. Basically, what pages do you have on your website? And then navigation is a system to guide users through the site. How do the users get there? So that's what we mean. And this is a big deal. So like when we redesign a website, one of the very first steps we do is do that audit of all the pages, of all the content on the site. Usually it's way more than anyone anticipates. And then deciding which pages stay, which pages go, which pages get combined, and what does that look like on the new website. And then ultimately, what does that navigation look like? What are the main navigation items on your website? And that is a huge deal. It takes a lot of time and effort. And in a perfect world, you review your analytics on your current site. That way you understand how your audience is using your website. And that can help inform what pages stay and go, what pages you combine and consolidate. So it takes time and effort. And if you work with us or a web vendor, hopefully they can do this for you. But they can't do all of it for you, and we can't do all of it for you. It has to be a back and forth. And if you do it all yourself, you have to spend a lot of time on it. You have to really consider the perspective of your audience. And it's something we spend quite a bit of time on doing here. So this is Nike.com. I felt like They have 1 million pages on their website. And it's super tempting, the more pages you have, to have more main navigation items. But we generally suggest to have 3, 4, 5, maybe 6, not too many more. The simpler the better. There's some really great websites out there that have thousands of pages and they have 3 main navigation items, which I think is pretty fantastic. And that takes a lot of work, especially to get people to be able to get to the right place. But this one I thought was really great. I mean, if you look at this, this really speaks to the audience. It speaks to you. If you're looking to go buy something, this probably speaks to you pretty well. Men or women, pretty clear. Kids, pretty clear. Jordan, huge for Nike, obviously, and so many people come to the site to look for Jordan stuff. I'm sure they've seen the search volume. I'm sure they have looked at the analytics. People are looking for Jordan stuff, so that makes a lot of sense. And when it comes to any clothes, store, online, or anything like that, new is always such a big thing too. So I guarantee that's one of the things that they saw when they did their tests. And then last but not least, sale. That makes a lot of sense too, because people are always looking for sales. So really simple. They didn't try to get too fancy or too creative. Sometimes we'll see websites where they try to get really creative with some of the words, and they try to call, instead of calling it a blog, they'll call it something else. And maybe it's a more creative word, but everyone knows what a blog is, and so that's a little more clear. So you just have to keep your audience in mind when you do that sort of thing.
And one thing, just to touch on the Jordan thing again, they recognize that there's value in that brand name and didn't hide it. It would have been very easy to put that under, to have a Jordan section under men's, women's, kids, and sale, and they likely do have that as well. But don't be afraid to put the thing that's most important, or whatever your primary moneymaker is, in the navigation. We have, at Blue Compass, we do digital marketing. SEO is a part of digital marketing, but we have SEO as its own portion of the navigation, because we are an SEO first agency. That's where we hang our hat from an expertise standpoint, and what we really pride ourselves in. So it's okay to put that thing that is your pride and joy from a service or product experience standpoint up in the main navigation, and not to necessarily hide it, because from a structure standpoint, it makes sense there.
Yeah, it's like almost don't be too logical about it, because for us, SEO technically is underneath digital marketing. Technically, they could just have men and women and everything could fit under there, and that's logical. But this makes a lot more sense.
All right, so there are a few principles of SEO in the navigation that we wanted to cover today. The first being keywords. So keywords are key, a bit of a cliche, but they are really important. And your navigation is one of the only things on your site that is on every single page. So if you want to reinforce a keyword, and that is something your brand or your website is really about, it would behoove you to have that keyword in your navigation potentially. That doesn't mean throw it in there when it doesn't make sense, but if you have a page that's dedicated to SEO in our case, say SEO in the navigation, don't get too creative with it. It does have SEO benefit. That's been a question for a long time. There is SEO benefit to having that keyword repeated throughout your site, and it'll help show search engines what to expect from that page. So it's an indicator to Google as they're crawling your site. Okay, this link, that the link text is SEO, is going to an SEO page that is about SEO. So it's just reinforcing that. Clarity. So making sure your navigation has clear value to the user. What can they expect to see on the other side of this link in your navigation?
And that sounds kind of funny, but clicking is an intimidating thing to do online. Clicking is intimidating. It's less intimidating to scroll. Why? Because we all know what's going to happen if we scroll. You get to stay in the same place, just a different part of it. Clicking takes you to a new place. And that's why you have to be very intuitive about the link. People want to know where they're going. People are more likely to scroll than they are to click.
And then again, kind of showing the end user what to expect. And then the last component here is priority. So one thing we see quite often is that everything's in the main navigation, and then there's a secondary nav, and then there's a sub nav. If everything's important, nothing is important. There needs to be a clear hierarchy in your navigation, and that's going to be your user's first experience with what do you care about in your business. Again, Blue Compass showing SEO in the navigation shows, okay, they could have put that under digital marketing, but they hang their hat on this. This is in their main navigation. Similar thing with Nike, with Jordan. This is a differentiator. This makes us different. We're going to put it in the forefront. And then it's not a popularity contest. Something that we often see is from clients is, well, this page is really popular. It should be in the navigation. If we did this based on page views, the blog that actually inspired this talk today would be in our navigation, a blog about web design trends, because it is actually our #1 page on the site. That would not be a great navigation experience or useful to most users, so we don't have it in the navigation. It can't just be popularity. It has to make logical sense for you as a business to add those things into the nav.
And sometimes that can get difficult and political, especially if you're at a larger organization where all these different departments are really fighting to have a presence. And we've had a lot of conversations with some really big organizations where we've had to tread lightly because everyone wants to be in the main nav, everyone wants to be first and represented, so that can be difficult.
A lot of head nods with that one. So.
Yeah, everyone agreed, yeah.
All right, so we'll take you through a few common nav techniques really quick. First being mobile versus desktop, making sure that the experiences match. Now that doesn't mean that they look exactly the same. That just means that any content that you could essentially access from the desktop navigation also needs to be there on mobile. You don't want it to be a less than experience on mobile when you compare it to desktop. It can't be a second-class citizen. It has to have its own experience. And then experimenting with bottom nav on mobile, seeing this more and more on e-commerce sites. The reason for, and what I mean by a bottom navigation, is where the main navigatable elements on from your navigation are actually within thumb reach on a mobile device.
Like how most apps are.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
When you see an application on your phone, usually it has a bottom navigation, whereas most websites have a navigation up at the top. It's a little harder to reach. Not that anybody is losing their minds over having to reach to the top right of their phone to click a hamburger menu, but it is much easier for people to reach. And again, it shows that hierarchy. You have 2 or 3 main pages you want to get to.
And that's a little bit of a newer trend with websites, and we're starting to do that more as we design websites, but it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I would say our main implementation of it today has been to put CTAs as like a sticky bottom nav on mobile.
Call to actions.
Yes, calls to action. Get a quote, contact us, those types of things, making it really accessible at the bottom on mobile devices. Thank you for not letting me use jargon there, Drew.
I'm here to support you.
That's right. Speaking of calls to action, what is that primary next step? So making sure you have a CTA in the navigation, it's not enough just to have information there. You want somebody to do something. So what is that thing you want them to do? And this needs to be differentiated from the rest of the navigation. You'll see here with Thunder Creek, they have very standard kind of white navigation elements, and then the get a quote is a big red button that's bolded text and has a white outline. It stands out from the rest. So making sure that you differentiate that so it's clear, this is what we want you to do. This is the next step if you want to get in touch with us. And traditionally, this is the last link. I can't think of many use cases, Drew, where you wouldn't have that CTA element as the last link, but maybe you have an example.
I don't know. I mean, it could make sense to have it elsewhere, but usually it can be the last link because it's the most apparent. Yeah.
And then consider a secondary nav for any supplementary CTAs. So if the main thing you want somebody to do is get a quote, have that get a quote button, and then they might want to call or they might want to schedule an appointment, you could have a secondary nav for those elements that are less prominent calls to action that you might have. Next nav technique is Mega Nav. The team kind of probably cringes a little bit when I say Mega Nav because I always try and recommend it, but it really does. There are pros and cons when it comes to Mega Nav. So the first, for the pros, listen up, any developers in the room, this is the thing that I care about. No, display more content. A Mega Nav allows you to show more of your site very quickly. So you see in this example of bluecompass.com, under digital marketing, you can see all of our services and get to them very quickly. And not only that, we have keywords underneath of them to show you what to expect on the other side of that link. So it allows you to do that in a really easy, cool, visual way. It increases interactivity. So it's much more visually appealing, and generates more engagement. We talked about engagement as a goal earlier. If one of your goals is more engagement, a mega nav is a pretty easy way to do that because it visualizes rather than just having a standard drop down in your navigation. And then it's just a more modern technique. I would say in the last 5 years, really, mega navs have come to the forefront. And so it does bring a modernity to your site if you feel like your site is currently more stale and you have standard drop-down menus. Now, cons. It does not translate to mobile. A mega nav is not, this experience is not going to translate one-to-one to mobile. You're going to have a different mobile experience. Whereas with drop-downs, that's a little bit more consistent with what you see on a mobile device. You do have to be more intentional about structure, which we talked a lot about being intentional today. So if you're being intentional on the front end with what content you need and how that's structured, then a mega nav might be a good choice. And then it is less intuitive for some users. There are situations where people are used to just being able to click a main nav element and go to a page and then hunt around and find what they want from there. If that is the case, this isn't the right navigation for you in those situations. But for a more tech-savvy user, this is going to be pretty intuitive. And then sub-nav and secondary nav. I talked a little bit about maybe a sub-nav makes sense for secondary CTAs in certain situations. This is often improperly used. This tends to be the dumping ground for anything that we want to include in the navigation, but wasn't important enough to put in the main nav. So you end up with all of these weird elements at the top or below a navigation. So avoid doing that. It needs to have a purpose. It needs to have a place. If it didn't deserve to be in the main nav, really think hard about, does this deserve to be in a secondary navigation? When to use a secondary sub-navigation? A secondary CTA like login. So something where they're not necessarily taking an action, filling out a form, doing a click to call, but they're logging into some portal on your site and you want that to be easily accessible to users. That would make sense. Common resources like bill pay or FAQs. So if there are things that users need to be able to get to regularly, bill pay, documents, PDFs, that's something you should probably make accessible via a secondary navigation or a sub-nav. And then important content outside of your main nav like blogs. So if you couldn't find room in your navigation to include blogs, and blogs are a big part of your content strategy, then you may be able to make a case for having it be in the secondary navigation. And then a secondary navigation for a section of the site. So what this ends up looking like is we have a digital marketing portion of our site, and let's say we have a bunch of content on that portion of the site. Occasionally we will include a secondary navigation that is custom to that part of the site. So if it was digital marketing, we would also have SEM, SEO, and UX as secondary nav elements potentially. Those are less common because we would normally just say put those in the navigation in some way. All right, and then when not to use a secondary or sub navigation. We ran out of space in the navigation. You will get a no from us. I'm just kidding. We're not that harsh, but it will at least ask why. At a minimum, we'll ask why. It goes back to if everything's important, nothing's important. Really prioritizing that space because it's something that's going to be shown to everybody. And then I believe the last element here is our sticky nav. So a sticky nav is when you scroll down the page, having the nav still be accessible. Some sites have this, some sites don't. We think it's really important to have that experience be there. It makes it easy to continue navigating the site no matter where you are in the content. It takes a little of the pressure off of, to Drew's point, when you scroll. If you lose the ability to navigate around the site, you feel like there's a little bit more of a penalty to scrolling down the page. And then again, scrolling with access to the navigation, it should be a pared down experience. If you scroll down your page and you still have a secondary nav and a sub nav and all of these other elements, you have too much there. It should just be your main nav elements and then whatever hover experience you have.
Yeah, don't want to take up too much of the screen.
Yep. And then it should be present but not distracting. It's distracting. I don't know why I went southern there for a second. That was distracting for me.
It's a tough word.
Yep, yeah. Present but not distracting. So it should be there, should be at the top of the page, but it's not overtaking the experience.